It's week 4. Let's get to the headlines. Bills beat Miami. I think we all needed this. I mean, other than Dolphins fans, not exactly what you want to hear, but I think we needed a bit of a reminder that the Bills just aren't going anywhere. Now, granted, I picked them over San Francisco for the Super Bowl when we did our preseason picks, and I know it played out in the broadcast a little bit. So I don't know if this is just something that's happening. I know Mike Sando touched on The Athletic this morning as well, but if people were turning the page on the Bills, and I guess maybe it felt like more people were, and it also could be a carryover of the primetime effect. They lose to the Jets. Allen turns the ball over, carryover of his turnover issues last season. And then it's like no one really paid attention to him again. They beat 2 bad teams, although the Commanders seemed to fight quite a bit. Raiders, Commanders wins, but I mean, they were really lopsided, which doesn't happen that often in the NFL. So they slow down a Miami team coming off of 70 points. Allen has his first ever perfect QB rating in a game. The Bills, as a reminder, are now 40-13 since 2020. What I like about this outcome isn't just Buffalo beating Miami. It's that Buffalo makes some kind of statement, however many statements you can make that early into an NFL season of, okay, it's Kansas City, it's Miami, and Buffalo's still in that conversation, a conversation for the division too as well. Whenever you watch the Tua blueprint from last year, it was disrupt his timing, jam the receivers. Everything is very technical with this team. Well, whatever you thought you figured out with Tua last year, it didn't seem to be the case early on this season because they just have so much speed. You realize there were the 10 fastest plays in the NFL this season going into week 4. 5 of them were from Dolphins players of the 10 fastest plays in the NFL. So even if you thought you were disrupting them, and there really wasn't much disruption. We'll get to some of the Tua sack numbers here in a second. It was not just jamming receivers. It was getting after an offensive line that lost their left tackle in the second quarter for Miami. But even in the beginning of the game, like if you thought, okay, this is the game plan, it wasn't in the beginning. Miami had 9 first downs the first 2 possessions. Everybody completed every single pass, I believe, in the first 4 possessions for both teams. Miami had only 10 first downs the rest of the game. Tua's first 3 games, he was sacked at an unobtainable level here. 0.98% of his dropbacks. That's versus a career number of 5.36% of his dropbacks, which is actually still a pretty good number when you look at some of the sack totals of the guys that really get beat up in this league. So if you look at yesterday's matchup with them, a D-line that I've always waited for to just be like a real threat, because Buffalo's D-line, despite the resources, they've never really been in that group, whether it's the Niners, probably the Eagles. You know, Pittsburgh always seems to figure out a way, and now I'm focusing on some of the top guys, maybe even Dallas, but you get the point. Like there's a lot of dudes that they've spent picks on for Buffalo, and that's what won them the game yesterday, disrupting them and then lighting up a Dolphins defense on top of everything else. So if you look at the hurries and the hits, this was a completely different game than Tua has played in, but I don't think it's as simple as just jam the receivers and throw off their timing. But Tua wasn't really the biggest issue. You give him 48 points in a game. You know, that's on a defense too, where I don't know if it's fluky for Miami's defense. It may have really been a simple, like, now Miami scores 70 points against Denver. Buffalo feels like they need to remind everybody again. They're far more geared up for that. Miami feeling themselves a bit after scoring 70 and probably could have put up an even bigger number if they wanted to. I think the human nature part of this may have played in, because I would not be surprised if we move forward and then Miami wins the matchup in Miami later on the season. I'm just not going to be. I don't think this proves that it's all Bills, but I just like that it was just, hey, whatever Nance and Romo were talking about, whoever was ever thinking that, I still don't think it's that big of a group of people. I just don't think this team should have the page turned on them because of the playoff disappointments of the last couple of seasons. I think it's a tough league to win and advance in. Even Tyreek Hill said, we kind of needed this. And that's part of a longer quote, but I'm not really taking it out of context. It's essentially the same message. Bradley Chubb was saying stuff afterwards where it's just, you know what, bit of reminder. There seemed to be a common theme from some of the quotes that I was reading of just guys going, we might have been feeling ourselves a little bit. Maybe they are making excuses. You could say, hey, that was a real ass kicking, and maybe it has to make us revisit all these things. I don't know. I don't think there's like long-term reclassifications of who Miami is. I just think it was a really great game for Buffalo and for Allen, and go, you know what? We lost that one against the Jets. We beat 2 teams that nobody was paying attention to, but now you have to pay more attention to us, especially when you look at the AFC race. where it was just kind of felt like it was Kansas City and Miami with Cincinnati at 1-3 and going through their issues, and then Baltimore at 3-1, but they lost to the Colts. They've had a favorable schedule on some of the matchup stuff. They got Cleveland without Deshaun Watson, but just adding the depth to the top of that, or maybe replacing Cincinnati in the conversation a month in on that tier 1 of AFC teams. A month into the season, I do like looking at the unknowns. The quarterbacks who we do not know how their story will end. Although there have been quarterbacks in the past, I swear to God, we were on like year 10 with Jay Cutler. We were like, if you just kind of had like one more weapon and could do this. And it just goes on. I mean, eventually, I think we do it with Kirk Cousins still too. I don't. I personally don't. But I think if a guy plays for a decade and we're still wondering who that person is, I think we actually know. And some of us just don't want to admit it. And if we look at the unknowns for the younger quarterbacks, some of it's just not worth bringing up. Like, I'm not going to talk about Bryce Young. I'm not going to talk about Anthony Richardson. Although, if you watch Anthony Richardson on Red Zone, you're going to like it much more than if you watch the entire game. But he's already missed time in his rookie season. We knew he was going to be a project, so none of this even matters. C.J. Stroud, however, like, the numbers are terrific. Completion percentage, the 1,200-plus yards, the historic stuff he's doing, 0 picks. Kenny Pickett, after a massive preseason, that wasn't great yesterday. Had a couple not great Kenny Pickett. What happened to the preseason Kenny Pickett stuff? I don't know if we remind everybody the Danny Cannell story. I've been thinking about it, but it's only, 15 starts for him? So we're going to chill out on that. I'm not going to worry about it. Sam Howell, I don't even know if he's in here because everybody just expects him to be replaced, although he's kind of the comeback kid here, almost getting his third come-from-behind victory yesterday in a tough one against the Eagles, but they made a play. Crazy thing about that game is if he had completed the pass prior to the touchdown, that would have been short of the goal line, and the game would have been over in regulation. Desmond Ridder, maybe we know the end there, and we're just delaying it because he's still young, but it's been bad. It's been really bad for him, but it's still kind of early. Zach Wilson, I think we saw something last night, but it's also part of the broadcast too, where, I've seen a Fields game with this. We'll get to Mac Jones here in a second, where I feel bad for the broadcast team in a way because they spend time with these guys. They're in the production meetings. I've talked about the production meeting scenarios so many different times for different games that we're really locked into, but it's almost like the national broadcasts are incredibly nice to the quarterback that sucks for 3 hours. It's like, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit. I think it's kind of unavoidable. I just think that it is. I don't know that it's ever going to be better. And I just don't know that you're ever going to get a broadcast where they're just going to dump on a quarterback the entire time. I just don't think they are. I mean, remember the Peyton Manning stuff at the end when he could barely throw the football and guys are still like, man, there's still a little spice in that mustard, and you're just like, dude, he threw a pop-up for 15 yards. Like, what are we talking about? So that critical 3+ hours of the quarterback that's clearly struggling broadcast, I just don't think will ever exist because I think broadcasts actually have gotten nicer and nicer over time. So maybe we don't need that. But Zach Wilson had that moment early where you're like, this is going to be really, really ugly. And he probably played his best game. We saw a lot of Taylor Swift cutaways. One thing I was thinking about through all the Taylor Swift coverage, Jackson Mahomes has to be dying right now. All this content he's not a part of. All the missed opportunities. I mean, can you imagine? I know he's going through some stuff, but can you imagine Jackson Mahomes FOMO right now? All right, just something that popped in my head. Jordan Love, 5 starts, whatever. Daniel Jones, is he still actually on this list? It's kind of a Jay Cutler, but he has like 5 more years to go. Kyler is ineligible, we'll say. But it felt like there was 2 quarterbacks maybe that were no longer unwritten. Q. Justin Fields. That was a weird game. We'll get to that one in a second against Denver. But it seems like everybody's ready to turn the page on him. And they might not be wrong. Maybe we're just delaying this. But I really want to focus on Mac Jones. Because I watched yesterday, and I just started writing down the plays that were awful. He had 2 throws to the other side of the field. He did it before the pick 6, where you're like, what's he doing? And I don't know if that was the play or it was some kind of misdirection to try to get the defense overloaded on one side, or if he just said, I'll just throw it over there. Because the weird thing with Mac is when I see him get frustrated, I think he reverts back to like, well, everybody at Bama was so good, I just throw it up and they'll make a play. You can't do that with this group. And I've heard all the Mac excuses. A lot of them I agree with. I have no idea why they did that to him last year. We've covered all this stuff before. They actually spent a ton of money at receiver and tight end last year, more than any other team in the NFL in 22. Where were they? I forgot Juju Smith-Schuster was even on the team this year. And they spent a ton on tight ends on top of everything else. And I think because he's gotten hit so many times, I think he's actually been hurried more than any other quarterback in the NFL. I also wonder if sometimes he's hurrying himself because he's been hurried so many times. And now it's just the cycle of him feeling like he has to get out of the pocket, doesn't stick in. I thought the 2 fourth down plays against Philadelphia were inexcusable from him. So all of it collectively, despite the excuses that I buy about Mac Jones, I don't buy him enough to absolve him of this. He's just not going to be the guy. It's weird because he was kind of like just above mediocre or beyond mild expectations his first year. Because Brady was this game manager for the first Super Bowl, it's like every game manager is like, well, look at Brady. Like, dude, it was over 20 years ago. And he turned into the greatest resume quarterback we've ever seen in our entire life. So, yeah, cool. Good plan. But let's go through some of these. So the 2 throws back to the left side, one that was a pick six. He missed Gesicki in a tight end in the end zone. Just missed him. He fell down on a 4th and 1. He had another crosser underneath that he was completely late on after the receiver had gotten separation. On 3rd and 7, I don't even know what the play call was before the end of the half, where he almost threw another pick. He threw a pick on 4th and 2, but it wasn't a 4th down throw that made a lot of sense because it was still like giving up good field position. It wasn't like that kind of turnover. You're like, the pick's actually a punt. It was 3rd and 7 at the 30, I think, when they were trying to figure out what they want to do at the end of the first half. It's not like this offense lights it up. There was like barely any time left in the first half. He had a fumble that turned into a touchdown. In the third quarter on a 3rd and 6, he decided to run it. He was short of the sticks. 4th and 2, that's when he threw the other pick. He had a third quarter play at 6:19 where it was 3rd and 6, and he felt pressure enough to kind of move out and then completely missed Devontae Parker on another crosser route underneath. So I'm not telling you he's playing for McVay. I'm not telling you he's throwing at Jerry Jeudy and Waddle anymore. But I don't know why anybody expects this to work out at some point. So I am officially moving on from it.